Oil is a very alluring source of energy, which is why it's something that we keep coming back to. And it's why the value is the way it is.
I was just looking up here at the prices going, oh my gosh, they're just getting higher and higher. Yeah, it's expensive, especially when you drive a big car.
Forced me to change my position, try to get a job where I didn't have to drive every day.
This affects the price of the supermarket, and that makes the solar expensive right now, and the gas in my car. But at the same time, my husband is working in an oil company, and he's doing better than before.
Oil prices have climbed from $10 a barrel in 1999 to $95 last year, to what it is today. 50% of Houston's economy is in the oil and gas business, and we hold 30% of the entire U.S.-based refining and petrochemical capacity. It's affecting us differently than the rest of the country. But most consumers are feeling the pinch, and many are asking, what's really in the price of gas?
The obvious piece that's in the price of oil is the price of crude oil, which everybody knows has gone up dramatically.
The price of gasoline is determined by supply and demand. We try to come up with other answers oftentimes, and I think it's politics at its best, but it really is supply and demand, and there isn't any evidence that manipulation of the commodities is occurring.
The first thing that drives cost is the cost of getting it out of the ground, the actual cost of finding and development, all the materials that go into the daily job of drilling wells and completing wells and running the production equipment and all of that and all the high technology that's associated with it. You're paying twice as much for petroleum engineers and petroleum geologists as a few years ago.
Though oil in America has not been officially subsidized, many industry experts believe energy policies have protected Americans in the past from the real price of gas.
We have, for 30 years, been complacent, frankly, as a country in terms of energy policy, which consisted primarily of aircraft carriers in the Middle East, and also feeling that the real price of energy would stay low for an extended period of time.
In my opinion, the price of oil has been extremely low. I feel artificially low in the sense that we have done as a country everything we can to maximize the flow of oil into the country, to sort of maximize consumption of oil, and have done relatively little to improve the efficiency of the economic machine that's using that oil.
So now it's going to be a horribly painful process, not just for the people that are stuck in the gas guzzlers, but for those of us who have to drive the ugliest car in America.
I don't think it's going up that much, and I think it's going to level out. I don't think the percentage that's gone up is that great.
The hike in gas prices has increased other consumer prices as well. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, food prices have climbed over 4% since April of 2007.
I anticipated we were going to have this problem about a year before it happened. And, I mean, I hate to say this, but I traded in a Trans Am with Ram Air, and I traded in my Lincoln Navigator and got a Prius, and I get 48 miles to the gallon.
I don't see it stopping. I mean, the oil companies are having record quarterly multi-billion-dollar profits, and you hear the economists forecast doubling in 5 years. And I think one extremist had it going to $15, which is probably a little extreme, but who knows?
The recent hikes have many Houstonians scratching their head and asking, how did we get to this point?
It's not about reserves. It's about production. It's not about the quantity of oil in the ground. It's about our ability to produce it at what rate. The reason that we are where we are is that we have taken advantage of something which has been given us, formed over hundreds of millions of years in the depths of the earth, and we have found a way to mine it and to use it and created a society out of it. So in many ways, there's a phrase in future studies, nothing fails like success. Of course, the other side of it is that nothing succeeds like failure. So that the oil economy is a hugely successful economy. So we kept, to use the metaphor, driving down that same road until all of a sudden the road ends or it becomes difficult or full of potholes, and we start saying, wow, maybe this is not the road we want to go on. Well, we can't just turn because there's no turnoff. We have to start, in some ways, backing up and saying, how can we now extract ourselves from this wonderful thing? It's exactly what the tech bubble was while everybody was making money. It's exactly what the housing bubble was while everybody was making money. Who was raising their hand saying, hey folks, things that can't go on forever won't. This can't go on forever. Are we ready for the downturn?
In 1998, OPEC got together. They made an agreement not to continue to invest and increase supply. Then you had some little mini crises like the change of government in Venezuela and the big strike in the oil industry. Iraq is engulfed in war. Iran has all kinds of financial problems. So there are all these places that had a lot of oil that literally stopped investing, either on purpose or by accident. And the end result has been there's not enough supply. So I really see it as a supply crisis and not just demand-driven crisis, because really demand has not been the driving force for 2 years.
Tight supply has been the focus of many economists, but many experts agree increasing demand from growing economies has also played a role.
The need for gasoline was growing, and the need for natural gas for industry was growing. Abroad, we were seeing a much higher need for oil from China, India, and the developing economies, and we just didn't keep up.
We've unleashed a number of countries from subjugation: Russia, China, India. India in the case of just an inefficient economic system rather than subjugation. And the result of that is higher gasoline prices, more demand for energy.
But Jaffe blames our own insatiable consumption of cheap energy more so than the demand from any other country.
There's 13 million cars on the road in China, which is very small compared to the 250 million cars we have here in America. And even if their demand is going up 2% and our demand is going up 2%, our demand is so much more substantial than theirs.
But not only are developing countries on the whole demanding more oil, many are also protecting their consumers from the real price of gas.
The prices to the consumer are subsidized. Now you have a couple of Chinese oil companies. They're crazy over the fact that they have to sell at the prices that they do, which are way below market price. But what does this do? It just simply insulates the Chinese consumers from the same kind of price effects that you and I are having to experience in this market, and which are changing our behavior as we approach the question of how do we drive our cars and heat our homes and things like that.
The United States does not get most of its oil from the Middle East. Only 19% comes from that region. We get most of our oil from Canada and Mexico. But the volatility in oil-rich nations, the U.S. financial markets, and the drop in the dollar have all played a major role in the surge in the price of gas.
The value of the U.S. dollar. It's been declining precipitously, really, since about 2001, actually, with a lot of that decline or decrease in value occurring over the last year or so. And that's related to, quite frankly, some of the financial malaise that some of the banks went through that's related to mortgage crashes.
We've kept interest rates low. We're trying to support and bolster the economy. We're trying to keep some liquidity in the market to offset all of the liquidity problems that we have in our financial sector right now. When you take actions that push your currency low relative to other currencies, on the one hand, it makes us competitive, because if you're producing something that someone wants to buy, it's a lot cheaper for them to buy because the dollar is cheap. But when you have to spend dollars for raw materials like crude oil or other commodities, it's really expensive.
Others blame the controversial theory of peak oil as a factor.
It doesn't have anything to do with running out of oil. What peak oil means is that we are at the highest sustainable production of oil that we can do. Even if we do drill more wells, if you look at the trend of the last 20 years, we've already found the great fields. They're now in sharp decline. We've already found the secondary fields. They're in sharp decline.
A more useful way of putting it is that the low-cost sort of access to oil, that era is pretty much gone, that we've pretty much exhausted the low-cost access to oil or the low-cost reserves of oil. So what lies ahead in terms of increasing the supply is increasingly high cost, which means increasingly being able to pay high prices for it.
Many believe we need to shift the focus away from the underground.
The geology might not be our problem. We need to focus on what's going on above the ground. Do we want to remove barriers to oil production either through diplomacy or through our own domestic policies, or do we say it's too hard to control those things, so therefore the best policy is to develop a policy where we can do the same activity using less oil?
Many oil executives and industry experts request the lifting of the moratorium on offshore and some domestic drilling to solve the problem.
We still, as far as I know, are the only country on earth that in a major way restricts access to its natural resources. 83% of all the non-park, non-wilderness land is unavailable for leasing. 85% of the offshore acreage in the United States is off limits for leasing. That moratoria were established almost 30 years ago based on a very different view of our industry on the backs of very cheap energy. And it's time to revisit that.
People who say, well, you're not going to get to energy independence by drilling in the United States. I mean, independence in the sense that you won't need to import anything, you know, that's true. It's a long-term solution in the sense that it takes 5 to 10 years to find and bring new oil to market. But could you get to a point where you restored enough spare capacity to the global market that you weren't at the mercy of this particular leader or that particular strike or that particular terrorist activity? Absolutely. You could get to that point. And that would be the proper objective of allowing drilling in more places in the United States.
We have really good reasons to think that we have good oil and gas resource endowments in certain locations. You know, billions of barrels that we think are undiscovered and really trillions of cubic feet of natural gas, which is really also just as important as crude oil for our economy. And if we can't figure out how to negotiate entry in our own country, then I think we have some really serious things that we need to face up to.
Others disagree with that solution.
Well, we're already importing something like 60% of our oil, and there's no slope in the domestic U.S. that is going to substitute for 60%. So if they're saying that the Alaskan slope will mean we become energy independent, I don't even think that's technically feasible. We do not have that much ocean. I don't know anybody who's saying that there is a reserve out there that will make the U.S. independent of the world crude oil market.
So we could open up the entire intercontinental shelf, but then we'd sit around and wait for a decade. And to really test the intercontinental shelf, you'd probably need the better part of maybe 300 or 400 offshore rigs. And we have such an offshore rig shortage that'll last the rest of our lifetime.
Why are they sitting there telling me they need access to more oil when they hadn't been working to increase fuel efficiency standards all these years? The oil companies should have been saying, we've got problems with oil in the long term. We need you to increase the efficiency standards if we want to make the economy good, or we want to make it good for everyone.
Some oil companies have dipped their toe into alternative energy, but frankly, there's way too much money in oil today to really have them be serious about it. Oftentimes, it is usually, in fact, not the same companies. It wasn't Bethlehem Steel that recreated the steel industry, really set up in the South with very high performance, high technology steels. They just closed. U.S. Steel and whatever. It wasn't the Detroit auto companies that created the hybrid and all of the innovations of small cars and highly efficient engines. So I'm not sure that the current oil companies will turn into energy companies, because if you're going to be a renewable energy company, it is very different business than the oil company. It's all energy, but after that it's very different. And very few companies can make the transition from one core business to another. Some do, but it is rare.
I think it's part of a solution. I think that to the extent there are the reserves that can be reached in an environmentally responsible manner, then I think they may have a point. But they are totally neglecting this whole issue of the overall strength of the economic system, the efficiencies. I mean, the oil companies ought to be out there telling, working with the public to get the motor companies to have more efficient cars. they're not acting in the consumer's long-term best interest.
Consumers are already changing their ways. Besides carpooling, cycling, and using public transportation, plug-in hybrids may be the closest transportation solution for Houstonians facing high gas prices today.
The benefits are huge. We save over $1,000 probably nowadays in fuel alone. For me, I looked at other things besides just fuel. On one website, you can compare over 5 years the depreciation or the first cost of the car, and in hybrid cars, they actually appreciate.
Hybrids are the big thing that are going on. I mean, that has broken into the consumer market. The big change that I've not talked about is plug-in hybrids. It can run on electricity for, say, 40 miles, and when you get home, you can plug it into your house and recharge the batteries that are on that vehicle. We've been used to very cheap fuel in this country, and adjusting to those changes, and alternative fuels will be a part of that transition.
But many industry experts agree the fastest solution to high gas prices is making good use of what we already have.
Conservation is the best oil field we will ever find. Don't worry about buying a Prius. Actually keep your Suburban and put 6 people in it. And per capita.
People making the decision how far they have to travel to work and to school and to shop, just even for essentials. Right away, therefore, you have people living closer to work and to school. As I said, the office becomes something that you go to once in a while, but you're not there all the time. Home offices then become much more important.
So I tell people our best oil field in the entire United States is located in Detroit. If our car gets 50 miles to the gallon, if tomorrow everybody in the United States had the option to buy a car that got 50 miles to the gallon, then that would be like finding 7 million barrels a day.
Other Houstonians clamor for better public transportation.
I think that definitely in one sense, I would probably say we are not that well placed, and that has to do with the sort of our mass transit system, which basically we don't have very much at all.
And another option is improving the industry itself.
One of the first things you try to do is try to improve the cost structure for the product that you're producing. The first wave is to try to improve the technology and the cost structure of the main business that you're in every day. And then the second wave of technology is to look at, well, what else can come into the refinery? And what else can we use to help support the liquid fuel energy base?
For others, that's not enough.
The best scenario for the Houston economy is to actually to continue to diversify. Being the energy capital of the world is great, and especially in such a highly profitable sector now. So that's great, but definitely, even 50%, I think, dependence on one sector is too much.
The way we're going to become energy independent is from a diverse source of energy supplies. It will include much more nuclear. It will include clean coal. It will include, for example, on the electricity front, wind and solar.
We were 80% oil in the early 80s, and now we're 50% oil. So we've taken some of that pain already, but as oil recedes from the energy picture of the world over the next 20 or 30 years, Houston will have to find other ways of making money.
Conservation is the one thing we can do to change the energy supply and demand equation today. There are no silver bullets to fixing this overnight. We got here over a long period, and it will take us a long period to adjust to something different. But at the end of the day, we've got to use what works commercially, not just something that works politically.
Technology helps, but you got to start with conservation. Lifestyles can reduce all of your needs about 50% easily. Hybrids are the first step, probably for the next 10 years. And then after that, there'll be fuel cells. There's a continuum. And then everybody will start biking to work again.
Moving to electricity even within conventional fuels is the direction that we're going in. I think we'll move to higher efficiency hybrids. I think we'll see vehicles that are capable of 100 miles per gallon or more.
A growing number of energy experts believe using corn ethanol as a biodiesel is the wrong policy to solve our transportation challenges.
How can we have a 30-year fuel strategy that switches us to ethanol grown in the Midwest when we're going to have difficulty growing anything in the Midwest because we're going to have climate-altering drought? So the whole policy is really the stupidest thing that anybody in Washington has come up with.
We still haven't taken off the corn and sugar bean-based ethanol tariff. We still are subsidizing to 50 cents a gallon for the blending of corn-based ethanol, and almost everybody I know recognizes that it was a bad answer. So government action goes for a long period of time. It takes a long period of time, like the Titanic, to shift it around. And we've lost some momentum to do something different and better.
We can generate electricity more cleanly than we can other fuels. From a land standpoint, certainly doesn't make the same kind of demands that a biological crop would make on land. Unfortunately, it's a tougher transition because we're moving from a different engine and we're moving from a different fueling infrastructure.
For Houstonians, this crisis will mean some painful changes, but many believe the future looks promising.
The benefit for Houston of higher energy prices is that a lot of the people that are actually trying to solve the problem from a producing perspective are based out of here. I think that's good for the economy because it provides good jobs, high-paying jobs, and it also is going to be an industry that is active and also robust. But there are a lot of consumers of energy, including all those employees, who this is not good for. None of us welcome this environment, even if you're energy companies, quite frankly.
What Houston has to learn how to do, and what our mayor is actually helping lead the way to do, is figure out how to be a city on a shining hill that practices a liberated workforce where people work when they want and where they want and get paid by productivity. We become a leader in growing food at home. We've become a leader in using our water systems to reverse engineer and use the ship channel to take goods. Don't build a superhighway to Mexico. Actually have ships going from the ship channel of Houston all the way to Veracruz.
I think people and companies need to be thinking about being diversified. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if the tide shifts very quickly, even the Houston economy could actually do much worse than it is right now.
When we have top engineers, we have top science universities, we have a lot of potential that we could apply to the whole range of energy technologies. We need to step up to the plate.
I think environmental concepts and would become more strategic to corporate planning. So I see those types of sort of systemic changes in the corporate thinking occurring. Houston's always sort of been in that enviable position of its companies that are oil related do well. I think the negatives for Houston are a couple. We have an awful lot of people in the energy business that live in Houston, and they bring a philosophy with them of no regulation. There's sort of this pro-market system, bias that you find there, which I think has led us to not do as well with local planning. We're going to have to come up with a mass transit system. We need a commuter rail system. We need a better light rail system.
I'm very optimistic about Houston, mainly because I think there is, from long tradition here and also from the type of the worldwide immigration that we have here, there is an entrepreneurial spirit.
Even though Houston is the energy capital of the world, and we've had some pretty great years because of the rise in oil prices, Houston's going to change. Texas is going to change. We're going to reduce our commutes. Nationwide, I think 20 billion fewer miles were driven in the first part of this year because of the rise in fuel prices. That's going to take on an extreme nature.
The danger for Houston is that it becomes so dependent on these huge windfall profits and revenues we're making from the oil economy. We say, well, that may be your problem in Chicago and New York, but it's not our problem, and we basically do not pay attention to the fact that we're really living what I call the Indian summer of the oil economy. And we're the beneficiaries of that, but that's not going to go on forever either. And that, on the other hand, might blunt people's incentives to start doing the things to prepare for a post-oil or even a post-carbon economy.
This is just who we are. We're conservative. We're entrepreneurial. When we are faced with a problem, we meet it. We accept the challenge. And people are getting very creative in ways that they can save money and save the planet.
The part that I think that we haven't really come to grips with and understood is how intimately connected our form of life, lifestyle, and city form is with oil. We think, well, we'll get a little bit of gasoline and we'll, spend some more money and things like that. But if we look at if you look at American life today, ever since World War II, oil is the primary growth industry because it was the oil companies, it was the automobile companies, it was the airline manufacturers and the airline companies themselves, and the petrochemical companies. All of that growth came out of the barrel of oil. That stopped some time ago in terms of actual growth. The oil companies have not been growing in terms of production that much since the 80s or the 90s. But as we now back out of that, we're going to have to find substitutes for all of those things.
We are not going to be able to maintain our lifestyle in any way, form, or fashion unless we start tackling this problem now.